All right, welcome everyone. For those of you who are here, welcome. And for those of you who are joining us virtually, welcome as well. My name is Aaron Koreva. I'm the director of the Atlantic Council Warsaw office. And I'm delighted to see you here at the last day of Warsaw Week 2024. Warsaw Week is our annual flagship conference that we do dedicated to strengthening the ties between the United States and Europe, and of course looking at this from a Central European perspective. And this year, we're very fortunate that we're following on the elections to the European Parliament, and of course looking ahead to the Polish presidency of the European Union in January 2025. As director of the Warsaw office, I see Warsaw Week as a key component of our mission here, which is of course bolstering the ties between Central Europe and the United States, as previously mentioned, but also elevating Central European voices in the European debate to address some of the most crucial geopolitical challenges that we face. And how fitting that we're going to talk about EU enlargement today, which is, of course, one of those major challenges. On that, welcome again. Please enjoy this special panel discussion. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Aaron. My name is Rachel Rizzo. I am a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Center. Thank you to everyone for joining us both in person and online today, especially in person because that means you braved the 90-degree heat in order to be with us today, so we really appreciate that. As Aaron mentioned, this panel is an opportunity to discuss the future of enlargement of the European Union, particularly in light of Poland's upcoming presidency of the EU starting in January of 2025. So as Europe has banded together really to fend off the rise of authoritarianism and growing insecurity on Europe's eastern front, Central and Eastern European countries like Poland have voiced their support for greater EU integration to improve regional security and stability. While the EU has stated that it views enlargement to the Western Balkans as a strategic priority, limited progress has been made in their accession. At the same time, there's new momentum around EU enlargement created by Ukraine's efforts to join the bloc, and especially in light of this week's exciting news that Ukraine and Moldova have officially opened accession talks with the EU. So we have, as I mentioned, an in-person audience and an audience that is watching online. We'll talk for about 35 to 40 minutes, and then I want to make sure that I give the audience enough time to ask questions as well. If you're tuning in online, go to askac.org, and you can submit your questions there, and they'll come to me. I have my phone, not to check my texts, but to make sure I'm watching the questions come in. And with that, I'd like to get started and introduce our fantastic panel that we have with us today. First, we have Mr. Wojciech Pyszbilski, who's the president of the Res Publica Foundation. Thank you for being with us. Yep, we have Dr. Melinda Bregu, who's the Secretary General of the Regional Cooperation Council. And we also have Marta Stachowiak, who is the Director of EU External Relations Department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Poland. So all three of you, welcome, and thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to be with us today. With that, I want to jump right into the conversation. And Wojciech, I think I'm going to start with you. On Wednesday, so that's yesterday, we had some exciting news on the EU enlargement front with the EU starting accession talks with Ukraine. So I want to open with that and ask, how can the momentum generated by Ukraine's progress towards membership really help drive the accession of other aspiring EU members, especially those that have been in the progress of joining for many years?
Thank you, and I think it's a very relevant question in today's context, and also has a bit of a history behind. Ukraine might not be the first one to join in the current process, but it's paving the way for the momentum of enlargement overall in the coming years. The EU strategic agenda, which is, as we speak, being coined and finalized for the next 5 years, is likely to bring to the Commission the perspective, the momentum for enlargement to be kept up. And it's largely because of the war in Europe fought by Ukraine and supported by the West. The freedom of Ukraine supported gives a window of opportunity for everyone else, Moldova, for the Balkans. And the historical relevance here is, if you look back to the Yugoslav wars, this gave an opportunity to Romania and Bulgaria. That gave the geopolitical urgency and push, the political push for them to join. And the political momentum that is generated because of Ukraine is cannot be understated. So because of Ukraine, because we want ultimately Ukraine to join, many other smaller countries may jump and prepare, and we need to get them prepared and generate the political momentum for them to be coming on board. From the Polish perspective, Ukraine is the most important, but we invested so much in Moldova, and I think it's I don't speak for the government in any respect, but I think it's a Polish perspective that we need to also embrace how much Western Balkans are or several countries of Western Balkans are also important, because the future of security in Europe and only geopolitical relevance European Union have is with the enlargement process. The only thing that we actually shape in the world externally is through and by the enlargement process, because we're making the space for security and peace and prosperity larger and more interconnected within the Western world, also between Europe and the US. So that's the significance, and the significance of this small but important, important big step, but not the final step in the enlargement that you referred to, the opening of the chapters and the treaty, essentially intergovernmental negotiations of the accession for Moldova and Ukraine.
Just as a follow-up on that, how difficult is this process going to be for Ukraine, especially, which is in the midst of this full-scale invasion that began in 2022, but really began with the annexation of Crimea in 2014. Does this mean that this process for Ukraine will be especially difficult and especially long-lasting, perhaps?
I think the more difficult part is on those who have been in the enlargement line and they haven't been making progress. Ukraine has been, over the past 10 years, before the large-scale invasion, making progress, getting into speed with reforms, and through this period, difficult years before 2022, has made a lot of preparation for what then become a momentum in the current in the current context. And I mean, if they continue this way, they might be actually faster and ready with adopting the necessary reforms, with closing the chapters, because enlargement, as much as it is a bureaucratic process, and the EU is bureaucracy, we like it or not, it is. There are good bureaucracies, there are bad bureaucracies. It's quite efficient, actually, contrary to the stereotypes. There is a need for political will, and without political will, you don't have enlargement. And in Ukraine and Moldova, you have the drive, the political drive, that this is the objective, this is going forward. And you have also sponsors of that objective, political sponsors in the EU, like Poland and many others, who are like-minded and they are willing to support it politically. There are certain perks. We need to be prepared much better than we are from the EU side as well. But that generates a lot of pressure on those who were not making progress, or they were for many years in the line, and they're not showing this political momentum.
Thank you. Marta, I want to come to you next and sort of build on the question and answer that Wojciech gave. So he mentioned you have a lot of members in the waiting room for EU enlargement who have been in the waiting room for quite some time, and that waiting room seems to continue to get bigger. So my question for you is, specifically, what should aspiring EU members in the Western Balkans or Ukraine, Moldova, do to really ready themselves for enlargement? And then similarly, on the other side of that, what does the EU do? Because this is a two-way street.
Well, but this is a question that has, I think, a very obvious answer, but I don't want to, state the obvious. I think Wojciech has already mentioned that. A true political will and commitment are on both sides. This is, I think, the first and the most important precondition, because we've seen that the lack of political will on both sides actually resulted in nothing in the last couple of years. I don't mean the last 2 years, but before that. So we had a real stalemate because there was no political will, neither within the EU, or at least in some part of the member countries, and I think nor in the Western Balkans. And of course, this is the first precondition, but this is not enough. I mean, what we see now is that the political will from the EU part has actually allowed for the process to get accelerated, but then again, this is not enough, because it's still a merit-based process. The criteria has to be fulfilled. And what I would say from the Polish perspective, there are two big blocks or two elements that are crucial. One thing is the sort of a geopolitical choice, or the way we actually call it within our European jargon, which is the CFSP alignment. This is something which might seem technical, but in fact it's not. It's about choosing, your allies, choosing the side basically you want to be. And if there are members, if there are countries, that try to become the members of the EU, but at the same time are not willing to share our values, are not willing to say on which side of, let's say, the geopolitical conflict or confrontation that we are in, they are. This is very difficult to imagine them being members. And I'm saying this because we already have experiences which are quite difficult in the area of CFSP with the current member states, not to say more. And another element which is, I think, equally important is the question of the rule of law, democracy, and so on. So this is absolute necessity. We've seen it as well in Poland, how important that element is for the EU. So once you get there, you should as well, be able to fulfill all the criteria and manage to stick to rule of law and democracy. And in that particular sense, it's even more important now for the candidate countries to actually do their homework before they join.
So, as a follow-up to that, can you highlight a little bit about in what ways enlargement policy is going to factor into Poland's priorities when it assumes the presidency of the Council in January of 2025? Because it seems as though if the EU enlarges, this does mean that Poland's role within the EU will fundamentally change in some way. So I would love your thoughts on the Polish perspective of this specifically.
Well, thank you for that question. It's again quite clear because we already have the horizontal priorities of our presidency adopted by the former government, but still kept by the current. And the enlargement is one of those priorities. And when I say horizontal, I mean we're going to actually implement it across the board. So it's not going to be only about the negotiations, but it's going to be as well about including the candidate countries in all sectoral policies, trying to have a political dialogue during the informal councils, trying to have programs as well, including the candidate countries. So this is something that we want to actually do across the board. We've been discussing that during our interministerial meetings. So this is one element. The second element is, of course, that we hope to advance the negotiations as such. With Ukraine and Moldova, it's quite clear what we can do. Just like you said, that we just witnessed the first intergovernmental conference 2 days ago, and now we are entering in the phase of screening. It's going to last at least several months or maybe up to a year. So a very ambitious objective would be to have to be able to open the first cluster. This is called fundamentals cluster within the Polish presidency, but this is a very ambitious objective. But there are other countries that are negotiating already. Montenegro had an intergovernmental conference just yesterday, so we very much hope that we will be able to move with closing some chapters there and maybe even clusters. So we want to do it in both directions and have a real progress. About the Polish position after the enlargement, well, it will change, but not necessarily for the worse. But I think it all depends on how well we will be prepared for the enlargement. And we take this very seriously. And of course, Ukraine is the biggest objective, but at the same time, the biggest challenge. And to prove that we are taking this seriously, I can tell you that we already have established a team, which is, interministerial team that is supposed to prepare us for the enlargement with the Ukraine, so that we use sufficiently the time that we have before they join to adopt the new role of Poland in terms of, different positions concerning common agriculture policy, cohesion funds, and so on and so forth. So I think we can be stronger in that sense that, the gravity will move slightly to the east or to Central Europe, the way you call it.
Thank you. Melinda, I want to come to you next and talk about the Western Balkans specifically. The Atlantic Council team spends a lot of time in the region, as you know, and based on a lot of these conversations, one of the things that you hear is that they're sort of the key to EU entry is a common regional market. And open and free and easier trade between the Western Balkan countries, which is very difficult in the current situation for various reasons. Can you talk about the Common Regional Market Initiative? There's the second version of it. How does that differ from the first version, and how might that ease the Western Balkans' path into the European Union?
Well, let me try first with only one remark on enlargement and on Ukraine. Yes, it was great what happened yesterday with the accession talks with Ukraine, and I think that was the key momentum that really highlighted the heft and the limits of Europe regarding the enlargement and the political decision on that one. We have been, like from the Western Balkans, witnessing that the enlargement policy is one of the policies that worked for best for many years by pressuring the politicians within the country and by pushing tough reforms forward. It has been present as well, a lip service during all these years in all the corridors of politics in the Western Balkans as well as in the EU. So for somebody, the process was really like trying to meet the reforms required, because those reforms will make you appear and look like a better leader in the eyes of Brussels. And Brussels will come back by certifying that you are doing well as politicians, and then you are going to ask for more votes, and the voters will always come back to you, kind of thanking you by voting. Because you already did a lot in the process of integration, not enlargement. So in the Western Balkans, the process is EU integration, and it's a special one because it was based on the SAA. So the process for many years, it has been stagnating. Just consider that the ones that are born when Croatia became a member state, or the ones who were born at the Thessaloniki process, 2003, when the promise was made for all the Western Balkans, today are 21. So they are voting and they are listening during all their lifetime, from kids to adults. Their country will become a member state. While many things changed during all these years. The Balkans started the process years ago. Three things stay, I think, in our line. One, there is no country in the region in the Western Balkans that hates the EU enlargement or sails east. They all prefer and they all agree that they are sailing west in the process of European integration. Secondly, the countries in the region understood after so many years maybe that they need and they necessitate to come closer together, to deepen the economic integration among themselves. The funds that have been given to the Western Balkans as part of the IPA funds of multi-annual financial frameworks from the EU are always welcomed, but never enough. So we need to use every single opportunity to close the convergence gap between Western Balkans and the EU. And third, this one is even more important, there is a consciousness in the region that maybe the membership is not going to happen in the near future, this is for sure, but it might be even harder to happen in our lifetime. Why I'm saying that? Because the process of negotiations is quite a difficult one. It takes years for a chapter to be opened or clusters to be opened and then closed. And the process have been, as I said, due to the political problems in the region, specific countries in the region, being stalled for many years, from one to another. Just take Montenegro, for example, or Albania and North Macedonia. And I said the third, and I will say that the last reason for that is not helping the process, is the bilateral problems that have been present during all these years, from or in between an EU country and the Western Balkans. And whenever a bilateral card is raised, you never know how it's going. Take the case of North Macedonia. What happened with them with Greece? And once they patched the deal and the agreement was there, the Prespa agreement, now they have a problem with Bulgaria. And who knows who is going to be the next in the row. Now coming to the common regional market. There is nothing new, let's say, in substance of that. The common regional market tries to emphasize and bring the region closer together, working on the same model of the single market, the one that EU has in place and that has been invented by the times of Jacques Delors. The common regional market is based on the good neighborhood policy, which is a prerequisite for the EU integration or for the membership into the EU. The first phase finished some years ago. It highlighted the necessity and then underlined the need for the leaders of the region to meet together and discuss about the commonalities, infrastructure projects, political discussions, disputes among them, and so on. So the first round, as part of the Berlin process, I think that the main or the core benefit was bringing the 6 leaders of Western Balkans closer together, meeting each other in one room or around one table. The second phase, or the first phase of the common regional market, it changed the name. It gave the sense to the region that there are some common policies that we need to develop for the benefit of the citizens. They need to understand that the regional cooperation will bring benefits to their lives. A lot happened. A lot of policies were aligned. We opened the green lanes in the region during the pandemic. We already prepared, endorsed, and worked on 7 agreements to recognize 7 professions in the region. Academic qualifications have been endorsed, diplomas as well, endorsed and ratified as agreements. Everybody can recognize a diploma without any further hurdles. The roaming charges in the region went to 0. We started the process of roaming reductions with EU. All these are part of those policies that bring the region closer to the EU. Now, the new common regional market is not only part of the growth plan, but is one of the pillars that will be testing in parallel let's say, the decision-making in the region to work closer together, and on the other hand, to work on the policies that will bring the region closer to the EU single market. So we try to consolidate and create the framework of a market, align a market among ourselves, and now we are trying to propose, not only to propose, to facilitate, like from the RCC, those policies that will bring the region closer to the single market. And why I said that membership is going to be quite difficult. This new consciousness in the region now is 80% of the citizens think that the cooperation will work faster in changing their lives. And second, they know that it's going to be hard for membership, so everybody will be focused to work on being part of the single market, which will again mean a lot for the region. But again, everybody has to know and to say that the single market entrance is going to be even more difficult than the processes that have been run up to now, because there is a lot of legislation in place in there that has to be changed, and a lot of policies that is the EU that has to drive.
But you're also saying that you see a scenario where the bilateral issues that have thus far stymied cooperation, you see those starting to dissipate because EU membership is getting closer and a more tangible possibility?
Not always and not happening every single day. There are moments of improvement and there are solidarity shown, just during the pandemic that I mentioned when we kept the borders open among the countries of the region. But there are moments as well when the political decisions and the political rhetoric is the one who really impedes that strong cooperation in the region. And as you know, there are bilateral problems in the region still. There are countries who doesn't recognize another country. I'll give you the example of one of the agreements that was tabled 4 years ago. We worked a lot as from the RCC, and then it was part of the Berlin process. We called it the agreement out of all the agreements, which was the freedom of movement with ID cards in the region. And the sense of the freedom of movement with ID cards in the region was merely to lift the visa regime between Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo. So to use the process of regional cooperation as a good push factor for Bosnia-Herzegovina to accept and Kosovo to leave the visa regime, because people and citizens that are traveling to each country are always having problems. It didn't work out. Although it was promised, although it was signed, although it was endorsed, and yet it didn't work out. Because we know that there are some problems in Bosnia-Herzegovina as well, not only when it comes to the decision-making, but to the decision-makers in there, who are not allowing the agreement to enter into force. So it goes by seasons, time after time.
So, Wojciech, I want to come to you and ask you about so Melinda was talking about the risks of the failure of deeper integration within the Western Balkans and what that means for the EU. But there's also, you've written about the costs of non-enlargement from an EU perspective. You said that the failure at enlargement could cripple Europe, and this is in a report that you wrote called The Costs of Non-Enlargement. And you said that the failure of non-enlargement would mark the disappearance of one of the EU's foremost foreign policy tools. Can you talk about that? And then, Marta, I might ask you to expand on Wojciech's answer.
So that process, this report is essentially it's a foresight report with 4 scenarios that we engage stakeholders, policy stakeholders, and together us at Respublika Foundation Visegrad Insight and the Zeit Foundation, German Hamburg-based foundation, we got engaged scholars and their fellows into thinking through the possibilities of the state of play and try to bring a Central European answer to the discussion that is already molding across Europe also on the enlargement. And one of the proposed theme is that we need to reform in order to enlarge. That's something you hear quite often in Berlin and Paris and the EU. We explore these themes, and the part of the scenarios, and that there are 2, when we explore costs and risk related to non-enlargement, because that may eventually lead, such a position may lead to not having enlargement process, bears fundamental risks to Europe and European Union. Fundamental because the rationale of European Union is that it is a peace project. It is it's essentially, since the onset, it's a peace project. It's increasing security in Europe. It's a soft add-on of NATO, one might say. But it's in parallel, it is a truly European, genuinely European invention, how we move forward and secure peace on the continent. So far successful. How do we expand that? If we fail to expand it by either because we decide to stop, or we fail in the process and because of these bilateral issues of lack of political will, lack of reforms, this is not happening, that bears consequences to the stability, to the political stability. There are political risks, there are essentially risks that our adversaries will take advantage of. Europe not long ago, unfortunately, but better late than never, realized and put together and understanding who are adversaries. There is a common language finally in the strategic compass through the language of sanctions, who are adversaries, who are not. These adversaries are taking advantage of any failure that we have in our neighborhood. That's as simple as that. That's the significance of failure to enlarge and not to have this process is that we will increase the zone of instability in areas that they are more and more economically interconnected. This economic connectivity and common exchange and interest, they're molding our common future anyway. So what we can do about it is only set the rules on which this cooperation is set, and the enlargement with all the conditionality and the fundamentals and all these criteria is at essence. But what we argue also is that contrary to this pre-design, none of the past enlargement was pre-designed. No one ever planned for how the past enlargement happened, including ours. I mean, when Poland joined. And there were always unintended consequences. It's a political process. Therefore, it is a political process. You need to take a certain risk to this step further and then to adapt and to build further. This is the key message of the report, to instill in a public debate and among also policy stakeholders the type of thinking that needs to ask the question, what are the costs of inaction, costs of missing this opportunity? And I think I basically can quote that it was really the thinking of Deputy Foreign Minister Marek Prawda in his op-ed to Gazeta Wyborcza about enlargement was including this perspective. And I think that is very close to the mindset in Poland also, to think that and to talk with other partners that there are certain costs of inaction. And that's also why we need to mobilize political will in Europe.
So I might ask you one more follow-up, and then Marta, I'll ask you to follow up on that as well. Does that mean as the EU enlarges and more countries with differing priorities and visions potentially join, that the EU will fundamentally need to change the way that it functions in order to continue to make progress?
But Marta said it. We don't want countries of different vision, fundamentally different vision, to join.
Sure, that's true.
We want actually those countries who are aligned to join even more. This is where we are politically sponsoring, and I think this is a good idea to have more political sponsorship of a certain enlargement to keep the momentum also within EU. Mm-hmm. This is about shape. I mean, even the opening of the treaty, this discussion about treaty, this is not just about their reform. It's about our process of adaptation to the situation. But I don't think fundamentally something can change by any of the countries from Balkans because of their size, simply. It's not that they will derail the process in Europe. And even if you think Ukraine of today, in terms of size, in terms of population, voting power, how different that is from Britain that just left. I mean, in terms of size and volume and impact on decision making in Europe. So maybe this is not so. It's not such a big threat to, as some would believe, to the disruption, political process disruption.
Fair enough, Marta. I'll come to you next and ask you to respond to.
Thank you. I'll start with one remark. I think Ukraine differs a lot from the UK. and first thing that comes to my mind, because we talk about the EU, is the approach to the EU and the enthusiasm about the integration that we've never actually witnessed in London. So, but of course there are numerous other differences, but you're right, maybe in terms of size and potential, there are some elements that can allow us to make a comparison. Of course, I agree with what's been said. I agree with what Wojciech said. There is a big, I think, political cost of non-enlargement if that should happen, if that scenario should happen. But then as well, of course, there is one element which is an economic cost of non-enlargement, because as the EU, we are not becoming more and more important in economic terms globally. Rather the contrary, we are shrinking in comparison. So, of course, it's in our own interest to enlarge as well economically. And, of course, Western Balkans are not going to make such a big difference because of their size. But already Ukraine is a substantial change, or could be a substantial change, and not necessarily a burden, but an advantage in the long term. If we look at all the opportunities that we have, even in terms of, being one of the biggest producers of grain in the world and so on and so forth, not as Ukraine, but as EU. So Ukraine, a member of the EU. So I do believe, and of course, being a country that is bordering both Ukraine, but as well Belarus, we think of this, of cost of non-enlargement is like having, let's say, Belarusian scenario in Ukraine in the worst case scenario or something of that sort. For Poland, the cost is obvious, right? I mean, if we don't have Ukraine that is European, that from our perspective should as well be a member of NATO when the time comes, then we might have numerous negative scenarios, and we don't want to see any of those, right? We don't want to see a state that is totally dependent on Russia, but we don't want to see, for example, a fallen state with the potential it has in so many areas as well, military now. So anything that could happen is definitely more negative from our perspective. And on the change of the EU, I don't want to get into this discussion about the necessity of a treaty change because I don't think there is a real appetite for it now within the EU, at least at the political level. But I think I would agree that we need to adapt in one way or another, and that's what we're trying to do, I've already mentioned, in Poland internally. But of course we need to adapt as well as EU27. And I do believe this is more about policy, about sectoral policies, and the way we want to see the EU, what we're going to finance, where we're going to invest in order to actually develop faster and to be competitive. Then the decision-making process and all those nitty-gritty. And with CFSP, it's already complicated, I would say so. But at the end of the day, we've managed to, to forge a compromise. Sometimes after very lengthy negotiations, sometimes compromises that are definitely not satisfactory for quite a number of member states. But that's the reality, and I don't believe that changing, say, the method of decision making or going from unanimity to QMV would necessarily be a silver bullet. I mean, it's not a solution to all the problems. I think, basically, to come to what I said before, if the EU is built on the assumption that we actually want to cooperate, that there is solidarity and loyalty and willingness to cooperate. If that lacks from even a single member state, then the system, starts to, work a little bit less efficient than it should.
Before I turn it to audience questions, we have around 15 minutes left. Is there anything that either of you wanted to add to that? Or, okay. I think, go ahead, yes.
Just one figure, one argument and one figure. So none of the crises that EU has been facing during all the last 20 years was caused by any of the countries that joined EU in the process of enlargement. So I can't recall any of the big crises, like the migration crisis or the financial crisis, none from the last enlargement, let's say, wave of enlargement. And regarding the Western Balkans is only 1% of the total GDP of European Union. So I wouldn't even like to think or just bring the argument of any disruption coming from the Western Balkans when it comes to the big size of European Union. And problems are present everywhere. But there is one thing that is true. European Union has to play a role as a great and a big geopolitical actor, and will do that only as a continent, not divided in bits and pieces. So that is quite important now for these times.
Thank you. I want to turn to the audience, and I see a question here in a second row. So 2 questions here, actually. So I'll start with the in-audience questions, and then our in-person questions. Then we have a couple online as well. Sir, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please
I'm
introduce
Yasir
yourself.
Tahil, ambassador of North Macedonia, the only ambassador here, so I have to speak.
Nice to
I'm
see
sure that Martin, what you've already heard, what I think about this problem, and Melinda, I met you last year on Prespa Forum. So I can only agree with, first of all, Melinda 100%, and with Marta, she mentioned that not all the countries that are trying to enter EU from Balkans are sharing the same values. That's right. There is a country which is negotiating now for 10 years and playing on 3 cards all the time. There is another country who became now a candidate, and at least 50% of this country is playing on some other cards. So you have a problem with North Macedonia. Of course, there is no white shirt of EU towards the candidates, but I think that the blackest spot is Macedonia now. Albania is joining us. Why? Because, let's say, we signed the association agreement in 1997. If we were not stubborn enough not to change the name then, at the end of 90s, if we changed the name then, we would enter EU together with Poland, and now we'll be like Poland after 20 years and not having thousands of stupid monuments in the center of my capital. So the history would have been changed. But we find courage enough Prime Minister to change the name in 2018. We changed the name and we thought that everything is done, but it wasn't. There was a very ugly proposal to change the criteria, then Bulgaria came, and who knows what will happen. On the other side, my generation was listening all the time that we cannot bring a bilateral issue inside EU. It was Greece, now it's Bulgaria for us. But at the same time, now on the same level with North Macedonia and Albania are Moldova and Ukraine. Of course, we are supporting them. But one country is at a war, the other country does not have control on all its territory, and they will open the chapter. And we and Albania can not open the chapter because some mayor in Albania is in prison, only because of that, or in our case, just because that Bulgaria thinks that we have the common language and common history, which is not the true. So you have on one side countries which are in war, starting the negotiations, and on the other side countries which cannot start the negotiations, in my country 19 years, because some other country thinks that we have bilateral history problem. So who knows whether, for example, Bulgaria, this is the last wish, and that was the narrative of the opposition parties in Macedonia. I will finish with this, saying who knows that this is the last wish of our neighboring country, who knows whether they have another wishes in the future, and that's why they won the elections. They started the new government just 4 days ago, and we are waiting what will happen in the future. Now it's even more difficult. After 19 years, after changing the name, after having a best notes with a screening process, because officially we started the negotiations in 2022, but we never opened the chapter, still we are stuck. And Ukraine and Moldova are starting negotiations. Nobody can explain that, so there is no white shirt on the EU side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Does anyone want to respond to this, or should, yes, Marta? Go ahead.
I won't be saying I won't be speaking on behalf of the whole of the EU. What I can say on behalf of Warsaw and our administration and government is that, well, we've always been very vocal and clear about that topic. We definitely believe that any bilateral issue between a member state and a candidate country should not be involved in the process of enlargement, and the enlargement should never be hostage of that. And I think we are a good example here because, as I think everybody knows, we as well have difficult past with our Ukrainian neighbors. We've got complicated history, but that has never prevented us from being the staunch supporter of Ukraine's accession, and the real one, not just paying a lip service. And we've never used that argument, not a single time. And we've been trying to convince the member states that have used those arguments to, change their position, but unfortunately, so far without a big success. But hopefully, it will change.
Thank you.
I think the rules in EU.
Yeah.
Not one country to have a right to veto.
Yes, but
It would be the best solution.
as you know, Ambassador, perfectly well, changing the rules requires unanimity as well.
Yeah.
The changes
So-
were mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I think there was a question in the third row as well here. And Ambassador Fried after.
Thank you. Jerzy Kwieciński. I wanted to ask you the questions and would be pleased to receive your responses, but not as representatives of the institutions you represent, but your personal views as experts. First question, how much time do you think it will take to close negotiations and to enter the European Union for those two countries, so for Ukraine and Moldova? So 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years, I mean, whatever. or some time framework. The second question, do you think that this enlargement, that this accession will be combined? What I mean by that? Whether these countries will be allowed to join jointly, so the two of these countries, or maybe it will be combined with some countries from the Balkans, so it will be, a group accession of a bigger cluster of countries than just the two. The third, do you think that if there is a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia, let's assume, in 2 years, will this peace agreement accelerate or accelerate, the enlargement process? We all know that Ukraine would not open this the negotiations with the European Union, and would not speed up this process if there were no the war which is happening now. So the question, how such an event like peace agreement, how this agreement could influence the speed of the process. And the fourth quick question, which country do you think, or maybe a group of countries, will be an ambassador, for those two, whether Poland, Germany, or whether, any other countries? Thank you.
Thank you so much. So there's a few questions there. I might start with you, Wojciech, at the end, and maybe come down the line, and Melinda and Marta after you.
So because we
You
were
can choose.
Yeah. Oh, one of them. Okay.
Whatever you'd like to answer.
Because I
you
have
can go ahead.
really short, because we were asked to speak our minds rather than
Yes.
expert position or institution. I think 3 years is doable for any, if you want it, you can do it in 3 years. This is from the procedural part. Combine, yes, you can combine. Should I stop? No. And peace, if peace would be a condition for enlargement, Russia will never have peace. So I think we should assume that we need to have enlargement with a ceasefire rather than with peace, and have Ukraine in EU on the conditions, without talking to Russia on this.
Well, I don't know which question to answer. Okay, so I agree, and I started. So I see the worriness at the ambassador's face, and I share it, and that's like the feeling everywhere in the region. So just by the way, I want just to give you one figure from the region. We launch every year one instrument or survey that is called the Balkan Barometer. And we measure the perception of the citizens and the business community from the Western Balkans on different issues. One of those is the enlargement and the desire or the hope that the citizens have on the EU membership of their country. And it is quite worrisome to notice that in the last 5 years there is a decrease of 8% in the belief of the citizens from the Western Balkans that their country one day will join the European Union. So it's still high, the percentage of those who believe that their country will become a member state and they would like their country to become an EU member state. It stands at 54%, but it is decreasing year by year. And if we combine then with the number of the youngsters who want to leave the region, if you ask them, would you like to build your future or stay at your country or leave for studies, work, health, better conditions in EU, 71% are saying, yes, I want to leave. So it's like a massive expatriation to the European Union member state countries, while the EU has all the leverage that it needs, that everybody else would envy in the Western Balkans, is the biggest investor in the Western Balkans. It's 71% of all the investments in the Western Balkans are coming, or foreign direct investments, are coming from the EU. It's the most preferred partner. It's Germany, it might be Austria, it might be Italy, it might be Greece, or Hungary, depending on the vicinities, but it's the most preferred economic partner for the business community in the region. So it has a lot to stay, promote, and work on the real improvement of the Western Balkans. You asked on how long it might take for Ukraine and Moldova to join the EU. I'm not answering on that because it's not that I know that reality and I cannot foresee anything. But I think first and foremost, what we should need, or we have to ask from the new commission, new, let's say, structures and institutions in Brussels, and the politicians who will take office in there, is just to think with enough of courage. We are discussing, when we speak of enlargement and EU membership, we are discussing on one of the biggest and the greatest foreign policy of a union like the European Union. And EU has nothing to lose by taking the Western Balkans, at least, as part of the European continent, as it has nothing to lose, but only aligning right in opening the accession talks with Ukraine, with Moldova, and Georgia then in the near future. These countries, or the countries of the Western Balkans, are safer within the tent than outside the tent. And when I said continent before, is because EU does not have any luxury to lose any piece of land. Western Balkans are part of the continent, of European continent. It's going to take, based on the process of today, conditions and how it is designed, 115 years for Albania and North Macedonia to join EU if we follow the same rhythm of Montenegro. So if we open the chapters like Montenegro has been doing during all these years and not closing those, if the same rhythm will be followed, it will take more than a century for Albania and North Macedonia. Do we have more than a century to live for? So none of us here in this room, but not even our children, maybe. And as I say, it's a matter of urgency, and it's a matter of having and finding enough courage to accept that the world is changing every day. And if Europe wants to be stronger, it has to be stronger as a continent, not only as the European Union.
Thank you. So I want to turn to you in just 1 second, but I want to get the question from Ambassador Fried first, and then you may have the last word here. So Ambassador Fried, over to you.
Zamierzam wyrzucić bombę prowokacyjną. I z góry przepraszam za to. But the issues of enlargement are tough. I'm not as optimistic, particularly about Serbia and its commitment to a European future. Vučić is playing a game, and I think everybody knows that. And I think Ukraine is going to have to transform itself, and that's not going to be easy. I mean, look what happened with Poland and Ukraine because of the grain. Maybe resolved, but that's one issue. But my question is this: while we're dealing with all of the issues you've mentioned, and you've mentioned a lot of the factors, I agree with it, the EU is having to make these decisions against the backdrop of Vladimir Putin and, to the west, the French elections, and further west, the US elections. And to give you an idea of that, of a problem from my country, if you read Robert O'Brien's, Trump's national security advisor, the last one, if you read his article, he says the EU ought to take in Ukraine immediately without any, quote, bureaucratic hesitation, which means they would love to, that camp would like to load the EU with all the responsibilities. So, and you've got Putin, who hates the EU and wants to blow it up or weaken it, and God knows what the French elections will produce. So how do you see all of these challenges in light of the moving target? And I am an optimist ultimately about Ukraine's ability to actually succeed in the war. It's not inevitable, but defeat is not inevitable. They can. But enlargement against a backdrop of big moving parts, not necessarily moving in the right direction. Sorry. Bomba provokacyjna.
Thanks, Ambassador Fried. So we only have a couple minutes left. There might be one more question. If you can make it really quick, please. I want to make sure everyone gets a chance for final comments. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Ruben. I have a question also regarding Northern Macedonia. What if one of the Western Balkan countries gets into the EU, and we know that those countries don't necessarily like each other all the time? How can you, as an EU, for instance, get away from this idea that maybe one of the Western Balkan countries would block another Western Balkan country to actually access into the EU? How can you make sure that you don't have such a scenario in the long term as well?
Thanks, Ruben. Appreciate it. So, Marta, I'll hand it to you, and then just go down the line for answers.
I'm not you.
Okay. Or for final comments from each of you, if there's anything burning that you need to end on, please join in. So, Marta, over to you.
Yeah, very easy question, Ambassador. I think we're all aware of the challenges, and when I was thinking about the answer to the former question about who's going to be an advocate for the enlargement, apart from Poland, Germany, France, and so on, I've been thinking, I'm not sure, and I would like to think that the general support for enlargement and political will survive elections in many member states, not only in France, but as well next elections in Germany, will survive the new Dutch government, and so on and so forth. So the challenges are numerous, but I think and I hope and I believe that this political decision has been taken. And of course, the EU is not ideal, but once it is committed to something, it can deliver. We've witnessed that. And I think as well that we are painfully aware that maybe the next American administration will want to put a bigger burden on us. And then in Warsaw, we're trying to prepare for it on all possible levels. Both security and economic and the enlargement-wise. And I think this can be even an accelerator of an enlargement. I don't want to guess when the Ukraine and Moldova will join, but I would say it's not impossible that they will join within the next financial framework, which starts 2027 and finishes 34. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. If they're going to be a big bank, I don't know. I don't think so, to be quite frank. From my personal perspective, I would rather see joining first one of the most advanced countries from the Western Balkans, because that would be as well a proof that it's possible in both directions, and the process is really horizontal and merit-based. So I think I'll stop here and let others as well to answer.
Thank you. Melinda, any final comments from you? Okay. Wojciech, you have the final word.
I liked bomba provokacyjna also as a term. Congratulations again. Right, I mean, we need to be prepared because the windows of opportunity for political decision that is fundamental for the enlargement are getting simply shorter and shorter. Maybe they were longer before, but everything in politics becomes shorter cycle these days because of the nature of politics and exactly the political cycles. So as we see in Poland, a certain cycle, political cycle also ended quite unexpectedly. You never know. And for that, you need to be prepared. This is maybe a bit of a criticism for how this government has been prepared to win and rule after. It's still cleaning the house, and I think does admirably well. But these things require certain process of preparedness. I think the EU needs, as you said, we need full European Commission mobilization of their resource to conduct all the necessary process with the candidate countries for the political openings that might be just very short in the future. And I agree with you that potential French elections may be kind of a no-go for time being. But then let's see how long they last, because the whole gamble, I understand, of Macron, let's see if he's right, is that their political capital, if they win, might be wearing off. Whether this gamble pays off, I don't know.
Well, thank you so much, all three of you. This was just a really enlightening panel and a fascinating way to end our public facing portion of Warsaw Week. There's more virtual events tomorrow that you can tune into on the Atlantic Council website and following Warsaw Week on X, formerly known as Twitter. So with that, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to be with us today and for providing us a lot of food for thought. And thank you to our audience here in person for taking time out of your schedules as well to join with us. So with that, thank you very much and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
I came in too late to know who you are. I came in the last 5 minutes.